In this presentation, I'm going to be reflecting on my so-called career and the influence of my time at Loughborough. And actually, it turns out that many of my themes and conclusions will be very similar to what we've heard from other graduates and graduate students. Many of you have excelled in academic careers. You know, you follow the traditional path from being a great college student to PhD, to university lecturer, to researcher and professor and revered leader in your field. And many of you are clearly heading in the same direction, which I love to see. My path has been a little bit different. But as a good scientist, I'm going to start out with a disclosure statement. No, I'm not. Here we go. This is my disclosure statement. And I say this because when people ask me what I do, and I say I'm a scientist, and they say, which university do you work for? And I say, well, actually, I'm self-employed. This is what they think. So I thought I'd just get that out front right now. I'm going to be talking about a few successes. Well, first of all, let me summarize my career, because after graduating with a first-class honours bachelor's degree from Loughborough in physical education and sports science, I became a janitor. And most of my job titles have been ones that I made up. My salary peaked in 1992, and I haven't had an actual job for over 3 decades. Now, I have received some awards for my work, but most of those has come from an organization that I created. So I will be claiming some successes, but I need to give you my definition of success. I think it's a good one. Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. It's attributed to Winston Churchill, but of course, you know, it's one of these memes that it's also, you can also find it being attributed to Abraham Lincoln, Albert, the Carbondale, Illinois, that is, Rotarian newsletter, and others. Probably Clyde Williams has been quoted saying it sometime too. But it all started here, September '73. Stuart Biddle and I and others arrived to begin our teacher training program as physical education teachers. We moved into the 14th floor of the East Tower, and we were there to become jocks. Now, the tradition of Loughborough jocks goes a long way. Here are some sturdy and scantily clad young men from 1935. Of course, when vigorously exercising, of course, that's what jocks do, when, at least in them. By our day in the late 1970s, of course, that had all changed, but not as much as you'd think. This is P3E. This is my group, and one of 8 groups in the in our year. This is the final year of our physical education and studies. And we, after 3 years of playing together, working together, going through some pretty terrifying experiences together, Stuart will agree with this, we were pretty well bonded. Here they are again. This is actually at the after our last formal class together in physical education. It was a judo class taught by Robin Jones. And I want to mention Robin because nobody's mentioned before, but in my first year, he taught us a class in educational gymnastics. And I was kind of a hyperactive teenager, and this was, for me, the best class of the year because he was talking about meaning and understanding through movement. And I learned so much from you, Robin, and it changed my whole view of what I was going to be doing as a physical education teacher. Thank you. Oh yes, so this is Professor Stuart Biddle, as you know. He's here somewhere. This is a good friend of mine, Gus McKenzie. Gus was probably the most talented athlete that ever came to Loughborough. When he arrived, he was already European junior champion and European junior record holder in the decathlon and in the long jump. In his first year, he represented Scotland in the Commonwealth Games in New Zealand. In his second year, he became the first British athlete to high jump 7 feet. And his third year, he went with Stuart and I to the University's Athletic Union Championships. The UAU as it was then, it's now something else. He was in 4 events and won them all. He was more recently, after that, he went to the Sarajevo Winter Olympics as the brakeman for the Great Britain Olympic bobsleigh team, the B team. They beat the A team by 5 places. And more recently, he's been had a successful career in facility management, event management. He was the man responsible for the stadium during the London Olympics, and making sure that all the logistics are changing from one event to another. Many months preparing and training people to do that, and later on the same thing with Commonwealth Games and World Championships too. So, good friend. And now, so I've learned in physics that the rules of the universe tend to neutralize imbalances. In this group, it was the counterbalance to Gus's magical talents was this guy. He was skinny. He was slow. He was uncoordinated, and he was not very good at games. In fact, he was a self-confessed motor moron, also known as me. Now, people like me were not supposed to get into Loughborough. Before you could come in, you went for an interview. That interview included some physical testing, a workout where they made you play basketball, rugby, and shoot things and do tricks and tumble things. So how Rod Thorpe let me through, I do not know. But I think he was under some pressure from possibly from the biology department, but certainly from Basil Stamatakis, who was the acting head of department at the time, because of this. This was the only thing I could do. And as a lower sixth former, I found myself at the top of the British junior high jump rankings and decided to apply to Loughborough instead of studying marine biology at the University of Aberystwyth. Now, at my interview with Basil Stamatakis, it became clear he only wants to talk, but he was very impressed by the fact that I had been to a Loughborough 3As match as a sixth former on the side of the 3As. And he told me that my performance that day had beaten the Loughborough record by an inch, and he really wanted me to on his athletics team. So I'm sure he must have, I don't know if he had a talk with Rod or it was done indirectly, or Rod wasn't quite informed that day. But anyway, I got in. I arrived here in 1973 as British junior champion, won the British Indoor Championships the next spring. I'd added three inches to the college record by then. And I made it onto the GB junior team that following summer. I was out the next year injured, but came back and won 3 national collegiate championships after that. Even so, as you might expect, my career as an international athlete was tragically cut short by a severe and chronic lack of talent. It didn't really matter at that point, because by that time it had become all about the team and team success. And Stuart and I were both officers of the team. And during that period, after he was captain, I was the first student chairman of the club. And it was my job to kind of lead the transition from the old era of Loughborough College's athletic club into Loughborough Students AC. And so I think I spent more time writing a constitution than I did on my third-year essays. But I'm very proud to have been part of that and to be part of that team. And coincidentally, they haven't lost a national championship since, right? I'm sure of that. So as a motor moron, I got through the physical part of physical education with a combination of enthusiastic failure and willpower. Last night, when I saw Rex here still? Anyway, I saw, hey Rex, yeah. I thanked him for giving me a D+ in football. It was very generous. Rod gave me a B in gymnastics, which I thought was fair, and I was, in spare time, there's a group of us, Stuart too, who was not a natural gymnast. We would go to the team and be practicing all these maneuvers to score the points on this checklist that we had, and I finally got a B. And I think part of it was that, even I would crash and burn so often, but even if I crashed and burned, I kept my toes pointed. And I hope that may be why I got the B in the end. So by the time we left here, we'd become part of a long-standing tradition. We're very proud of it. Stuart says it's in our blood. We and others bleed African violet. It's true. I say it's written in our bones, but same thing. It goes that deep. The other thing has already been made clear, but I do need to state this loudly because some of them are here. The teachers we learned from were the best. We didn't know it at the time, but it turns out they were world leaders in what they do. Rex Hazeldine is here. Rob Thorpe is here. Is David Bunker here? Oh, that's too bad, but okay. Robin Jones, he doesn't know this, but I told you, he changed my whole attitude about movement and the importance of physical education. And then there are so many others that we've lost. I'm not going to name them all. I'm just going to point out a couple. Now, Clyde sent me to the FISSOC to present. The idea is that the FISSOC is supposed to be intimidating. It wasn't. Yanto Lewis was intimidating, if you knew Yanto Lewis. The idea of Jim Greenwood was really intimidating, not the actual person of Jim Greenwood when you met him, but the idea of him, with his incredible talents as an athlete and his confidence and significance as a coach. He was a very intimidating guy in theory. In practice, he's one of the nicest men you could ever meet. Then there's other greats like Colin Hardy. Mike Holliday was a good friend. We actually became quite close friends when I was a postgraduate because, we connected over all kinds of things, but one of them was his book where he was writing a statistics books with computer programs. But he didn't know how to program a computer, so I did the programs for him. And we became quite good friends over that. And that was a friendship that survived a very serious test. He came into the staff room one day and announced very loudly, looked at me and said, "Martyn, is it true you are dating my daughter's primary school teacher?" I said, "Well, that depends. Who's your daughter's primary school teacher?" Well, yes, I was going out with his daughter. So he made jokes about that for weeks at my expense. And but these and others are such great losses. But I, for one, am happy to name these people and remember them very well. And then there was George Gandy. George was a huge influence on me. He was my personal tutor, my coach, my mentor, my friend. He guided me into Loughborough. He sent me this beautiful, after my interview, he sent me this beautiful handwritten letter inviting me. And he was the one that guided me into biomechanics with another beautifully written handwritten letter. But for him, I would probably be on the Welsh coast with a bucket of wet, squishy things instead of being here with you today. So these people that I've mentioned, those that are here with us now, they weren't just they were great educators, but they weren't just educators. They were thinkers, they were innovators, and they were visionaries. And what you see around you on this campus, the Loughborough being the greatest university for sports studies and sports general in the world 10 years in a row, is largely down to their vision. I'm not talking about the sports science department. I'm talking about all the other things, the facilities, the associations with the governing bodies, and the training centres, and the national teams that work here. That's all basically the vision of these men that were my teachers. And I'm very, very proud that they were my teachers, and I owe you gentlemen a great deal. Thank you. So a year after I finished being a jock, I graduated with a first-class honours degree in physical education and biological sciences. There were no physical tests involved with that, so I did okay. I had no idea what I was going to next, but I had discovered something. I had discovered already, I knew I wanted to be a scientist, and I'd already discovered Shorten's first law of biomechanics. A plus B plus C cubed equals N. Athletics plus biology plus computing, calculus, and coding equals nirvana. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I came back to the university, and I got a job in the Purple Onion, which was then a burger bar. I was the breakfast cook, the short order cook for breakfast. And in my spare time, I was in the library studying, trying to find a research project. I had no funding and didn't know where it was going to come from. But then I got a message from Tom Jones, who was then the acting head of department, and I went to see him, and he told me about the pending funding and about the arrival of Harry Thomas, and said if I hung around, there might be an opportunity with the Sports Council money. He also offered me a job, a full-time job, as a storeman cleaner. That meant I was the top of my class the previous year, and then this year I was in the gym scrubbing the toilets and sweeping the floors and cleaning the footballs after Rex had got them all dirty. That was the picture. I was later joined in the storeroom by Steve Wooden. Are you around, Steve? There you go, Steve. Steve had been promised some Sports Council funding, and he had this, which I hadn't. And Harry had got this job to keep him around until the funding arrived. Steve was a bit of a diva, actually, but he still is. But we've been friends, and have remained so ever since. Now, of course, Emeritus Professor Stephen Wooden, PhD, OBE, etc. I have to say this. I could have told the story later, but I'll tell it now because while he is now a world famous nutritionist, remember when he arrived, he was a beginner. He wasn't that good, and his first experiment on carbohydrate loading, I almost died of hypoglycemia. But to be fair, he almost died of hypoglycemia too. Yeah. So, my job as the I'm just going to use a blank slide while I talk about something. So my job as a janitor is to this day the most prestigious paid position I've ever held in an academic institution. So for a while now, I've been lobbying for the title Janitor Emeritus. I've mentioned it to several people. My friend, the Chancellor, says, yeah, I think we can, yeah. But anyway, I heard last night, Lauren promised me that I'll look into it, which I take as very, very, very positive. Anyway, one day in the stores, Harry Thomason came to the door, the side door of the stores and PC, knocked on the door and said, are you Martyn? Yeah. Do you know anything about analog computing? Yeah. Okay. And he left. An analog computer looks like this. It was an old way of doing computing it's basically what we call an electronic breadboard these days. It was a way of doing basic computations with pre-programmed or pre-designed circuits to add, subtract, multiply, integrate, and so on. So Harry didn't ask me how much I knew about analog computing, and he certainly didn't ask me if I knew everything about analog computing, nor did he ask me if I knew anything in particular about analog. But I knew they had one in computer sciences, and I knew roughly how it worked. And even though anything in particular is part of anything, something is also part of anything. So I said yes with confidence. I might have even smiled. Anyway. That was it. That was the entirety of the interview I had. And a couple of months later, I started my new position as a graduate student in the new Sports Council Research Lab. So the reason why that thing came up is because of this: the Centronic Sports Medicine Testing System. There was a company called Centronic that Harry had a deal with. We were going to help them develop a mass spectrometer-based breath-by-breath respiratory gas analysis system. And there was no analog computing. There was some very low-level computing, which was done by Nigel Watson, the guy in the chair. And then the guy on the treadmill is me, looking skinny, by comparison. And I've been writing computer programs since my second year as a jock, as a self-teaching myself how to do that. And my skills at that point were enough to do the application level coding and the parts of the user interface, but we needed some help for the part in between. Actually taking the data that Nigel was producing and organizing it to a point where my application code could work it. So I talked to some of my friends at the computer center, and they said, go talk to Chris Hind. Chris Hind was a lecturer in the Department of Computer Science. He just in his first year as a lecturer, and he kind of joined us on the team. He also, one day when I was up with him in the computer science department, he pointed to this PDP-11 computer, which is just like the one you see on the screen. I said, nobody's used this for months. I bet you could borrow it. I said, great. And he said, actually, if you don't say anything, they'll never ask for it back. So he arranged for a van to bring it down. We put it in the former closet that was to be my computer room. And that was the department's first computer that we actually owned. Or didn't exactly own, but had acquired. So now, here's a great shot. This was like a publicity shot. And this is the moment when Clyde taught me everything he knows about computing. The exposure time was about 1/60th of a second, which is just long enough for him to tell me everything, and just short enough to fit inside my attention span. So that was kind of perfect. I do believe the first paper that the group produced was this one, Shorten, Martyn, and Williams. That's all there was in the group at that time, published in Sports Engineering. And then there's the infamous FISSOC paper that was on a different topic. And we also were, I was doing kind of mixing the biomechanics in what was supposed to be an exercise physiology lab. So we have things like this in the International Journal of Modeling and Simulation. Everything's gone downhill from there. It's all like metabolism stuff now. But in the good old days, we actually had some real mechanical theory in the work. So there was another, in 1983 when I left, as well as doing the research assistant thing and the physiology thing, I was also doing my own research, which was on trying to look at the mechanical energy changes in the human body in a mechanical sense and relate them to running economy. And asking a lot of questions that are still being asked today. And I hadn't written a thesis when I left. I went straight into self-employment as a software engineer. Months later, the phone rang. It was Steve telling me that Clive had set up an examiner and a date for my thesis defense, or for his thesis and mine, and I had basically 8 weeks to write a thesis. So there it was. I wrote a thesis in 8 weeks using a BBC Micro and a 12-inch television as my word processor and a dot matrix printer as my typist. 450 pages, 80,000 words, 85 figures, and actually AD, Steve and I all went into the lab on the same day and dropped our thesis on the table. When I was looking in my archive trunk where I'd had some stuff with me from this era, I found a box with the original computer printout of my thesis, and it was on kind of dot matrix printed pages. And I realized that it was 450 pages because that was the amount of paper in the box. Was about 500 pages, and so I could just print it all out on one box full of paper. This is my where is it? Oh, here's another thing about this. So this is my thesis. I recently, earlier this year, I examined a thesis for a mechanical engineering student at a university in New Zealand. And in the paperwork was the document that said, yes, this had been checked for AI content, and that it had been cleared as being original work. So I thought, that's interesting. I am going to put my thesis through one of those checkers. So, and just for the record, I figure the other 4% is like the extra pages that the university library puts on the front. So Now, this was 1984, and there was no AI, or was there? Because remember I mentioned Chris Hind, my good buddy Chris Hind. A few years ago, he retired. He was emeritus professor of computational intelligence at Loughborough University. So I'll leave you to decide what the truth was. So that done, I went back to my my business as a software engineer. I got involved in some great projects. I'm just going to skim through a couple of them. And so this one was a project for the Middlesex Hospital, analyzing echocardiograms. This was a time when everybody was trying to get, that had been using paper charts and everything, were trying to get this stuff into computers. And that was something I could do. And I made a living from things like this and things like this. This was analyzing diabetic retinograms for the University of Swansea Hospital Ophthalmology Department, and some fascinating work there. And this one was really interesting. This was for Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, where they had me doing some analyzing the Doppler ultrasounds of people's peripheral blood flow. And they were always very vague about what they wanted this software to do. And then they said, it's fine, we're done, just send us a bill, we don't need any more. Then the phone rang again, about 2 months later. We need you to come and change the software. When? Now. It turned out that they needed me to adapt it because they planned to use it in what became the country's first liver transplant, would you believe? I had nothing to do with liver transplant, I was just writing code to measure blood flow, but they thought that it ended up being in the OR with them. Another really fascinating one, also Cambridge-based, at the Scott Polar Research Institute. In 1958, the first nuclear submarine, the USS Nautilus, did a transit underneath the North Pole. It took, as you can see on the right-hand side, a straight line route underneath the polar ice cap, which, and they had a sonar pointed up at the ice above them, which means they could measure the profile of the ice, which for Peter Townsend and other pioneers in the world of global warming was important information, because they could use that, compare it with their current data to see how the ice was thinning. The problem was that it was all recorded on a chart recorder, a curvilinear chart recorder. So it was my job to write software to read these charts and turn them into linearize them and turn them into numbers that they could access. And they had a cupboard full of rolls of this paper, and then a room full of graduate students that used my software to digitize them all. My other favorite project was this, working with the Fort Europe in Dagenham, crash testing. This is a high-G sled. So instead of smashing up the car, there's, Galileo's invariance principle. If you accelerate it backwards at the same rate, you get exactly the same kinematics and other bits. This is when they were developing airbag technology. And that's where I first got an interest in impact attenuation and cushioning. So the phone rang again. It was Nike. Would I like to come over to the East Coast to their lab in Exeter, New Hampshire, to give a talk? And I said, sure, who to? And they said, well, Tom McMahon's going to be there. Tom McMahon was a Harvard professor of biology and of mechanical engineering. He was like my favorite biomechanist. Any chance to meet him, I went. Spent a few days there, thoroughly enjoyed myself, came back, went to work. Then I got another call saying, we'd like you to come back again and talk about a job. So I went back and they offered me a job. But that job was on the other side of the country in Beaverton, Oregon, near Portland. And I'd never been there. So, I need to go to Portland. So I took another trip to the US, to Portland, and to see where they were building their new lab. And what I was doing was great. I was enjoying it. It had many of them, but it didn't quite fulfill all of the requirements of Shorten's first equation. There was no athletics. There's plenty of biology, biomedicine, plenty of computing, calculus, and coding, but there wasn't any athletics or sport. So I thought, yeah, 2 years postdoc, that'll be great. I've been there for over 40 years, but it was supposed to be for 2 years to begin with. So for 1985 to 1989, I worked with Nike, and they gave me, I went there, they said, pick a research topic based on my experience at Ford. I said, I'll do cushioning, impact attenuation. So this is what the Nike product looked like in 1985. And then by 1989, we had this. And that wasn't all down to me. It's one of these things where, did I do this? Yes. Did 90 other people do this too? Yes. Okay, so it's the important, it's 90 people making important contributions to this thing that happened, but to be part of it is great. This one I had a little bit more involvement with. It's based on a patent, this technology in this based on a patent that's awarded to Bruce Kilgore and I, that had so that the Nike Air cushioning that we were using, we couldn't do stability with that. So we built this device that would go over it, that would give progressive stiffness from one side to the other and help control pronation. Then the first Nike, the first of a new line of basketball shoes, the first cross trainer, were all part of that program that we worked on. Well, then after a while, the phone rang again after 4 years. By that time, I was director of the Nike Sport Research Lab and had been for a while. And Puma was trying to recruit me, offered me a job I couldn't refuse. It was a promotion, and they offered me a salary that was 3 times the outrageous salary I was already getting at Nike. Sorry, 5 times the outrageous salary I was getting at Nike. So I thought, yes, I went. Very challenging job. Very challenging job. We had, they were headquartered. Well, I was living in Portland, Oregon, which is there. Their headquarters, where my office was, my secretary and my secretary's secretary, and a design team and other people there, a team about 20 people. But I also was responsible for, there's another headquarters office in Hong Kong that I had to work with, and a design office in Boston, design offices in the UK, and another design office in Germany, another one in Tokyo. And so I was doing a lot of traveling between these centers. And it wasn't like at Nike where I just had all the resources and people at my hand. I was actually kind of as director of research design development, at the same time I was trying to build this global R&D organization from these little fragments that already existed. At least it was all in the Northern Hemisphere. Except I bumped into the chairman of the board. Chairman of the board one day, he says, Martyn, I need you to do a little job for me. And I thought, well, usually when a member of the board says, I need you to do it, it means he wants you to get your guys in Taiwan to make a bunch of volleyball shoes for his girls' volleyball team. Nope, this was, I want you to go take care of the South American licensees. So I was no longer stuck. This did mean, I organized these quarterly meetings in nice places like, Puerto Vallarta and Cancun and all these other nice seaside resorts. We'd have these meetings, but it kind of extended my time on the road a little bit. So most of it was kind of organization building, but we did some things. We introduced a new line of products with this disc technology that did okay. We did some innovations in their soccer product, which people didn't like, so we had to make it look like it was the old stuff. But with on the inside, there's some things going to balance stability, cushioning, and flexibility, and other things. And then I was flying high, literally in first class, and something happened. Excuse me a moment. I'm going to get through this, and you'll understand. My wife, Ellen, went to the doctor. She was diagnosed. She had incurable ovarian cancer. I quit my job to be home with her, and about 10 months later, she passed away. That was obviously a big reset for me. It's a long time ago. I'm good. I remarried. I got grandchildren. All good. But at that time, you can imagine this was a big deal. And I took a lot of time off, and thinking about it, I decided I wasn't going to go back into the corporate world. That I would, yes, it was great, it was lucrative, but I would be a lot happier if I stuck with Shorten's first equation. So I decided I would just be a consultant and start picking up odd jobs here and there just to get myself back into the work. Well, then sometime during this process, I had a couple of projects. The phone rang again, and it was Joe Skyer. Joe was an entrepreneur and a former marathon runner, and he a bit of a shoe designer, and he had an idea for he was trying to make a shoe sole using a thermoforming process that had used two sheets of plastic that are molted to near the melting point and they're pressed together to make a three-dimensional shape. And he was trying to make a shoe sole out of that. It looked like this, and it kept breaking down. After a mile or two, it would it failed. I said, well, send me one, let me have a look. So he did, and I examined this and I kind of squished it a bit, and it dawned on me that what he was doing in this, if you look at the right here, he had a lot of vertical walls and sharp corners, all of which, when you compress it, were causing very high stresses, and which meant in the plastic fatigued very quickly. So I sent my notes to him, faxed my notes to him. That's what we did in those days. And sure enough, the places I had circled on the diagram where I predicted it would fail were where his samples had actually failed. So we had something. So I came up with a solution, which was this, which involved using these twin hemispheres as springs to kind of give a more smooth contact, a smooth compression that wouldn't damage the plastic. He had some, he was being funded by some investors. They really liked this, and they gave us money to develop it, which we did. Resulted in a patent. How long have I got?
About -10 minutes.
Okay. Is anybody in a hurry? If you want to go to the bar, I can tell stories all night, but I promise to be finished about 10 minutes. That's okay. Oh, as long as you want.
Cheese, like 4 minutes.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I could be here all night if you like. So seriously, but let me just whiz through some of this. So this was a good one because this says a lot about how these things go. So we got a patent. We now had a different technology. Now we had to try and find somebody to sell it to, which means a process we called kissing frogs, hoping one would turn into a princess and give us some money. So we kissed a lot of frogs, a lot of ugly frogs, and we kind of ran out of frogs. And we decided that reluctantly to go to the big frog that we didn't want to talk to, really, but we did. So we met with a vice president of Nike that we both knew secretly in an airport lounge. And he liked what we were doing. We then met with his senior managers and some other people at Nike. And the result was that we got our princess, and Nike licensed our patents, which was great. So this went to this, Nike Tuned Air, and then this, and this, and this, and lots of others like this. And it became the new Air Max and all kinds of things. And this. And it kind of became an iconic product. And well, to the extent that it did have its own logo, TN Air, Nike Air. And there were people around the world that were big fans of this and still are in places like Australia and parts of Germany. And Germany sells a lot of them still, as does Australia, New Zealand, parts of Asia. But so you get things like this. This is a real thing. It's a real tuned air car. Now, so how do you get from here to there? Well, let me tell you how you get to there, from there, from there, here, from there. You can make a lot of money doing this. You can start off with even more. First of all, it does need a lot of money. You need investors, not my money. You need investors, and they end up taking most of the value here. But you need people who are willing to put in millions of dollars to take that piece of paper and turn it into product coming off a production line in Asia. Many millions of dollars. You also need a lot of people. And you only get those people if you are willing to share your ideas with them and let them take ownership of them. Some people don't like to do that. They want to hold it close. The fact is, it is not just about teamwork. It is about sharing and being willing to give up your ownership of your idea in order to achieve your goals. I counted the people that contributed to this process. Just the people at Nike headquarters, people I knew and had contact with firsthand. There were over 100 of them. And in total, when you go to the global logistics of delivering all this product, there will be thousands of these people that contributed to this. Now, letting go can be hard, okay? And if you're in this situation, I strongly recommend that you just let it go, let other people take ownership. And if you feel unhappy, just go home and cry into a pillow full of royalty checks. But that was, so that was that. I'm going to skip some stuff. I don't want to, but I will. That thing turned into a company called Skydex, which still exists. I formed my own company called BioMechanica, and I'm going to skip through all these to the end to one lovely project that I want to talk to you about. And this will literally be 2 minutes because this is all the Cushing things. Oh, nice one, flight helmets for the US Navy. After 9/11, we had problems with venture capital, but we bounced back doing surfacing for the military. They called us and said, basically, America went to war, we need your help cushioning things, like helping putting cushioning materials into the bottom of Humvees and other military vehicles. So now our technology, which started out in a shoe, where it was pretty good, turned out to be great at protecting people from these roadside bombs. Now, when we test a shoe, this is what the impact looked like. When the Army tests the cushioning system, this is what it looks like. So that's good. Then we did a lot of work with the Runners World Shoe Lab for a long time and did a lot of research. Well, this is fun. This is the Portuguese version of Runners World calling me a mad scientist, basically, in Portuguese. But something about this enabled me to do a lot of research on running. We found some interesting things. We looked at some papers of lab studies and looked at the running demographics, which was heavily biased by young, healthy university students. Also, I did a field study with 2,488,952 subjects. Beat that. Didn't beat them all personally, but with working with Runners World, we had the internet. We were able to collect basic information for all these people, and we found that the average runner is actually older, heavier, slower, with a less mileage and a slower speed than you think. So I set about looking at these runners, and a lot of work, but looked at everybody was talking about forefoot, midfoot, heel strikers, and we found that when we asked them to self-report their foot contacts, 53% said midfoot striker, 14% forefoot striker, 32% heel striker. And this is an N of about, the actual self-reported was an N of about 2,000 people. When we observed 14,000 marathon runners with high-speed cameras and had a look, we found that 94% were heel strikers. We also found that there were no distinct categories. If you look at the distribution of those scores, of the foot angle at contact, it's basically a normal distribution. There's no obvious breaks where you distinguish between one foot contact type and another. So I'll give you Shorten's definitive definitions of foot contact types. First of all, distinct foot contact types do not exist, especially midfoot strikes. Midfoot strikes do not exist. And even if midfoot strikes did exist, which they don't, we couldn't measure. one last thing, because this is fun. Just watch this. Test your observational skills as scientists. These are some runners. Now, some of you will have seen this before. If you have, please don't say anything. But if you haven't seen this before or seen me present this, tell me what you observe. They're all heel strikers, yeah? Well, yeah, they are not leaving the ground. The traditional definition of running is that you have a flight phase. Biomechanically, we have an energetic definition of running. And by that measure, we have, these people are running. They have a lowest point in the middle of the step and the highest point in between steps. But they are doing something we call grounded running. And I knew about this from the biological studies, because it's the way when you see wading birds running along the beach, they're doing grounded running. The back of half of an elephant is grounded running. And in the middle of a marathon, with an awkward speed, that's a little bit too fast to walk, a little bit too slow to run. That's what marathon runners are doing. The guys in the 6 to 9 hour range, a lot of them are doing this. And some other studies we did, we found that it also reduces the peak loads in that range of speeds for a lot of people. So I am going to close by saying thank you. I think a lot of what I have to say in terms of comments relate to things we've heard before. My experience at Loughborough set me up for all of this. The teamwork, the fact that Clyde and Harry were brave enough to let an ADHD physical education teacher who was keen on biomechanics into their physiology lab and basically let him loose. That was perfect. It gave me the freedom to do all the things that led to me doing all these things. And you saw how much computer science Clyde taught me. But as I said last night, I learned from Clyde how to be a scientist. And I learned that since I tell people, one of the best tools we have for answering questions, one of the best tools that humankind has invented is the scientific method. Use it, trust it. It works. And it's the best thing we've got. The other thing I'd like to tell you is that don't be afraid of failure. That each one of these things that are successes, I've been through rounds and rounds of prototypes, collected data that didn't work. The number of times we tried to collect stuff on snowmobiles and other things, we had to do it like 5 times before we actually got good data doing it. So there's a lot of failure. But like a high jumper, that's how you learn. And the only time you really fail is if you don't get up and do it again. That's the only time. So please, in this kind of environment, the industrial environment, you have to embrace failure. Finally, I'm going to tell you an important trick that I learned. Doesn't apply here, but it's an important trick I learned. I learned the best way, perhaps, of guaranteeing a standing ovation at the end of a presentation is to pay some students to take all the chairs out of the room. And it's happened twice, and it's been great. Now, all these chairs are bolted down, so I'm sorry, you'll just have to improvise. Thank you very much.